Joining us now is Kymone Freeman. Kymone is an artist, activist, and co-founder of the We Act radio network, which broadcasts this program. And we're here to talk more about Sandra Bland and all the implications of that story. Kymone, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thank you for having me, and as always, it's good to be here.
Thank you. Now, so what goes through your heart? If you don't mind my asking a personal question, what goes through your? I know what goes through mine, but what goes through your heart when you hear a story like Sandra Bland's?
I'm reminded of Malcolm X making a speech in L.A., and he simply said that black women are the most disrespected people in America, and that we don't really have any ways to protect our women, and that I want to say unequivocally that the case of Sandra Bland, she was murdered by Texas police officers. That is clear. Anyone who is denying that is ignoring history. We don't have to go back far to look at the fall of apartheid in South Africa, where there was hundreds of activists who were arrested and thrown in jail, and all of them were when they died in police custody, was ruled as suicides. Hundreds of them were ruled suicides. And, we have a picture of Gary Webb, the great journalist who blew the whistle on the CIA, cracking America, who was found with 2 bullets in his head, and that was ruled as suicide. So anyone who thinks that this young woman who left Chicago for a job opportunity at her alma mater, who drove down to start her new job, went all the way there to commit suicide. Mm-hmm. So there we have it. That's the facts. And until we do something about it, we're going to see cases like this. And frankly, I'm tired of marching. One of my late great elders, Dr. John Henrik Clark, said famously that marching is only good for the cardiovascular system. I'm in pretty good shape. I ride my bike almost every day. So therefore, the next logical step for me is we're launching our FTP campaign here in the District of Columbia that simply says female treatment protection, which will make it unlawful for any male officer to touch a female unless, of course, his life is in immediate jeopardy. So, and that means that he would have to call a female officer to effect an arrest. And if we had similar laws such as this on the books, Sandra Bland would still be alive today.
So let me ask you then about FTP. What if? Now, here's what they're going to say.
This is exclusive on the 0 hour. We're launching it here on the 0 hour.
Announcing FTP here. Okay, now I'll tell you what I think the police will say to you, and some of those folks in that crowd, they'll say, well, but what if the woman's committing a crime and she's going to get away if I don't tackle her, taser her, whatever it is the male officer feels he needs to do in that situation?
Unless his life is in immediate jeopardy, he has no authority to touch a female. He would pursue, and he has to have a female officer on hand to effect arrest. Much like you have the negotiators that seem to come in whenever there's a white perpetrator. That's what we'll do. We're going to start treating women, all women, as if they're white. That's what we're going to do.
Now we're talking with Kymone Freeman about, among other things, the Sandra Bland case and a proposed policy that male officers cannot touch female citizens except when their lives are in immediate danger. Now, one of the other things that brings to mind for me is that a lot of people don't realize that deadly force from police officers is there are already a lot of restrictions, not as many as you're laying out now. And I have another thought about that, but people don't seem to realize that shooting people in the back or shooting people when they're attempting to flee, as I understand it, I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand it, those laws are violated all the time too.
Absolutely, those are violated. It's actually unlawful to shoot a fleeing suspect. It was lawful for the vast majority of modern history in America policing. In fact, it was one of the issues that was instrumental in the inhumane and illegal ruling of the grand jury in the Ferguson case, because that grand jury was fed unconstitutional statutes that insinuated that it was legal to shoot a fleeing suspect, even though it had been taken off the books years before and ruled unconstitutional. They was fed that information as if it was, and then when it came time to render a verdict, they issued information to them with the correct information, but never pointing out the difference between the two. And that, of course, is what led to the verdict that we saw here today. But your federal system didn't see any problem with that whatsoever. So for clarification, simply keep your hands off the women. That should be enough, so that is minimal gray area in between. And I think that female officers should take that as a cue for recruitment purposes.
Now, I was interviewing someone in the law enforcement community a while back, and your FTP plan, that acronym, I don't know, it sounds familiar to me, but I was interviewing someone in the law enforcement community, and this is what made me think of it, actually. And he was saying, well, they were saying that Muslim women shouldn't be allowed to wear headscarves because otherwise, how do you identify them if you have to arrest them? How do you be sure? And my answer was, get a female officer.
There you go.
Right? So I guess beyond that, and that's a really interesting idea, we'll be tracking your success with this here in the District of Columbia, but we've got, what can people do to, we saw the demonstrations at the Netroots Nation last week against Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders. I work for Bernie Sanders, but we're here talking about something else. What would the idea? Hillary Clinton wasn't even there. What would we want our presidential candidates and other politicians, especially white ones, to be aware of and say, well, maybe everyone, to be saying in a situation like this and promising to do in a situation like this?
I first want to hear unequivocally that any police officer who breaks the public trust will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I have not heard that with my own ears. I need to see that that will also be acted upon. And frankly, since we have a black president who has not done that, I have very little hope left in that any of the names that you just mentioned will do that. But if we could put their feet to the fire and hold them accountable, maybe one of our new shining progressive hopefuls such as Mr. Sanders could do just that.
All right. Now, beyond that, what can communities do that and I realize this gets into a contentious area for some folks, but let's talk about it. What can communities do to try to reduce the incidence of violence? And by the way, when I say communities, I don't just mean local African American communities, but I mean their allies, who I assume must exist in other racial communities as well. So African American communities and their allies, what can they do on a state or a local level to push back on this stuff?
First and foremost, they need to recognize the power that they have. And the power that they have is not just within the ballot box. The power they have is also in their taxes that's paid into the municipalities that supposedly govern the police and formulate their budget. So they are, in fact, public servants. They are, in fact, employees of the people, and the people need to start exerting their will. We need to interrupt the Good Old Boys Network, as it is now known as, also called the Fraternal Order Police, also known as the police unions. We need to do a Scott Walker and break up these unions, their almighty unions, and provide transparency and accountability. We are demanding that we have some community control over the police. My top 5 suggestions is this: we need to have a legitimate citizen review board with the power to hire and fire officers for misconduct. We need to require that a significant percentage of police officers who work in our community actually live in that community. We need to require that any officer who is found guilty of misconduct be immediately fired and not sent on a paid vacation. We also need to require that out of all those millions of dollars of lawsuits that's paid every single year in every city in this country for police misconduct cases, that money needs to come out of those police department budgets, and it needs to come out of that police officer's salary. I think that alone will alter the behavior of rogue cops. And then finally, we do need transparency and accountability when it comes to negotiations with the Fraternal Order Police and the police unions over these city contracts. It should be public forums, and we should have full input, and it should have a guaranteed accountability for community control over the police who are supposed to allegedly serve in that community, but in many cases brutalizing that community.
Very good. Now, thank you for that. And now, I was in the audience in Phoenix when these two gentlemen were demonstrated against, and I said right up front, I don't know what the subjective experience is. I can't. By nature, right? So, but here's, I saw the demonstration. I have to be honest with you, there was a lot of it that was inaudible from where I was. I was back in the crowd, but I'm blanking on her last name. The woman, Patrice, who came up and talked for about 4 minutes, I guess I would say.
Yeah, she's one of the co-founders of the hashtag Black Lives Matter.
She brought tears to my eyes, and you know, I just found my eyes filling with tears while I listened to her. And I guess the reason why was, you know, we talk about policy, and we have to talk about policy. We talk about poverty. We have to talk about poverty. We all know these things are life and death matters, but I felt like there was another dimension to this. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Kymone Freeman. I felt that the other dimension of this was you people just broadly, meaning the progressive white community or whomever, you people don't see us. You don't hear us. You don't, you know, that you may feel that we are human beings with dignities and dignity and souls and, you know, and all of those things. You may respect us. You may treasure us, but it's not coming back. And so I felt that there was a kind of heartfelt cry of, you know, just deeds and words are not enough. There has to be a kind of heartfelt connection coming back, or I can't trust you. I can't open to you. Am I onto anything at all, or am I just like going down?
You're spot on, because what this is about, and where that space that she's coming from, is the fact that black people are brokenhearted. 95% of black people in this country voted for Barack Obama 2 times. And had he fought for us in these cases, if he had fought for us to hold any police officer who breaks the public trust accountable for their actions to the fullest extent of the law, had that had happened, if he had fought for that as much as he fought for the TPP, if he had fought for that as much as he's fought for justifying NSA's devices, we wouldn't be where we are today. We have to point out the hypocrisy, the outrageous juxtaposition of having a black president and a Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, this is outrageous that we had a black attorney general, a black president, in many cases a black mayor, and we're still suffering at the hands of police officers who are killing us unarmed in the streets. And there's no accountability. Baltimore is an anomaly. And you see that they're doing what they can to circle the wagons and get that case tried in Baltimore County or what have you.
Right.
If they could, they'd probably move it to Arizona. But that's where the space she's coming from. Because we have done everything. You can no longer, with a straight face, tell a black person in one of these situations, well, we have to wait until all the facts are in. Right. Oh, well, we have to allow the judicial system to do what it does. We have to trust the system is going to work. Look, Martin Luther King himself was brutalized by the police physically.
Right.
And also was harassed, and many would say assassinated by the FBI. We've seen this. They tried to give him a suicide letter, you know.
Right.
So, I mean, this is the system. We're talking about a system that's built upon white supremacy. No one wants to touch this. We are operating off of a public policy that was designed during the Nixon administration called benign neglect. Promise them nothing, give them nothing. You know, it's that Maria Antoinette, I believe I'm saying it correctly, let them eat cake.
Right.
And black people have been eating cake for a long time.
and it's not good cake. And, you know, I guess I would add another question to that, which is, so this is also a reason why the room erupted in fury when Martin O'Malley said Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, all lives matter. That whole all lives matter thing, to me, my feeling is that, but you tell me, and we'll close with it, my feeling is that the reaction is because, look, nobody has to say that white lives matter. I mean, that's a self-evident fact in the way the situation plays out. So if you say white lives matter, Black lives matter, all lives matter, once again, it's putting black people kind of at the end of the line. I mean, that's the way I read it. But what do you think?
Exactly. I mean, if you say Black Lives Matter, and then after that immediately say white lives matter, you just completely negated the power of the first statement, because no one is questioning whether white lives matter. Black Lives Matter is a statement that is standing to refute the notion of American history that has been declaring for 400 years that black lives don't matter. And we've seen in the past few years the police officers clearly have a mandate that states that black lives don't matter. You yourself just gave an instance of the disparity in treatment, and we all seen this over and over again. So that is the premise behind the statement Black Lives Matter, that should stand onto itself. It doesn't have to, you know, anytime something has benefited black people in this country, it has benefited others. Okay, and when we talk about affirmative action, they always want to paint that as purely this reverse racism. You know, instead of a leg up to address previous injustices of the special selective system that was been the mainstay of American history of the good old boy network, because women also benefited from affirmative action. In fact, I would go to make the argument that women has been the largest benefactor of affirmative action policies. Of course, all that has been rolled back now, particularly with Uncle Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. But nevertheless, Black Lives Matter is standing in dispute of the almighty powerful legacy and institution of white supremacy. And let me just say this, because a lot of white folks need to be educated on this issue. And some of them are insulted when you say, oh, wow, we have to be educated. Yes, you have to be educated on this issue, because they have confused white supremacy with white supremacists. No one is accusing all white people of being white supremacists, that is skinheads, Ku Klux Klan, or what have you. White supremacy can be as simple as this. You go to the movies. If it's an all-white movie, that's just a movie for everybody. But if it's an all-black movie, it's just a movie just for black people. Right. If it's an all-Latino movie, it's just a movie for Latino people. That is white supremacy. That's white supremacy. If you're telling me that this is acceptable and this is unacceptable simply because of the racial makeup of those in it, that, sir, is white supremacy. And
when I was a kid and I had my crayons, and the tan one, and the black one said black, and the brown one said brown, and the tan one said skin color, that, which it did, by the way, that was white supremacy too. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Kymone Freeman, thanks so much for joining us and talking about this painful and ongoing struggle. We thank you for that.
Thank you for the work you're doing. It's a great time to be alive.
Thank you. And we will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and Black Lives Matter.